recording. So, all right. So welcome everyone. My name is Xochitl Hernandez. I am an organizing fellow at the Horizons Project. And I'm pleased to welcome you all to our third intermestic webinar, the part of our series of intermestic, international, domestic learning exchanges, where we get to hear from activists, bridge builders, scholars, organizers from the US and abroad, as we tackle questions around how to build democracy wherever we are. So this series is part of a collaboration with the Democracy Resource Hub, where you'll find also a recording of this webinar and also some insights and additional resources. So make sure you check it out. I'm sharing the link on the chat for everyone to check it out. Awesome. As we start, though, I would like to ask everyone in attendance to share where they are located. So I'll share, there's gonna be a pop-up poll coming into your Zoom. And can everyone see the results? Awesome. Okay, while you all do that, let me share with you that this webinar is very special. We're in very tense months. You already also heard the beginning of our conversation there. And so in these tense weeks, especially for our peers in the USA, as you know, the elections are around the corners, stress is off the roof. So not only that, but also as we learn, as we lean into the pressing questions about democracy and nourish this conversation with international perspectives, also we realize that the more we delve into the conversation, the more questions we have. And one of those questions is actually, where is all the fun? These are very stressful times. So anyways, fun and laughter are not only tools to distress ourselves, even though these are very necessary as for the time being, but they also can be strategic tools for advancing and defending democracy wherever we are. Be it as a nonviolent strategic tactic in the form of dilemma actions, humorous dilemma actions, as we will hear in some cases, but also as a tool to bring people together, as some of the initiatives that we will have mentioned in this webinar. So this is the topic for today's webinar. And we have a stellar group of panelists with very diverse perspectives and experiences coming from different countries, and also our peers in the US, and also a wealth of knowledge here too, and who will be sharing their angles into this matter. So to begin, I will start with two very distinct, mainly seemingly distinct examples of stories, and then they will help illuminate how this can, how humor and also specific tactics can help us defend democracy wherever we are. So as we bring back Kumbulani. Kumbulani, you're there? Can you hear us? I think we're only going to have your voice. Kumbulani?
Yes, I can hear you, but I think my laptop can't access camera.
Don't worry. I think they having at least your voice, and then we can come back to you. But do you feel, if I share my screen and the pictures of your story, do you feel comfortable with us sharing it?
Maybe if you allow me to share from this site, it will be okay.
Okay, awesome. Let me know if you need help, and I can also share it.
Thank you. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think thank you very much for this opportunity. And
sorry, Kumbulani.
Yes.
I didn't introduce you properly. My mistake.
Okay.
But as we come to you, Kumbulani is the Mataleleland Institute for Human Rights in Zimbabwe. And he's the director. So please continue and please share.
Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity, and my sincere apologies for you can't see my face because of technology. I'll just share a brief story of the work that we have been doing in terms of dilemma actions here in Zimbabwe. So I think I'll share two critical stories very briefly. The first story that I'll share is our city, the city that I come from in Zimbabwe, is Zimbabwe's second largest city, called Bulawayo. And its motto is Siapambili, which means we are going forward. But we found ourselves unable to go forward as the residents of Bulawayo because of potholes that were littered our roads, and some of our cars were actually sinking into these potholes. Accidents were happening on a daily basis because of vehicles trying to evade potholes. And we had an incident when we had a nearly life-threatening incident with these potholes, and people will take on social media like Twitter, WhatsApp groups to start complaining. But we asked ourselves, what can we do apart from complaining about the potholes, which are blocking us from going forward in terms of traveling properly on our roads? What can we do? Then we started an initiative where we started uprooting grass from the side of the road and putting it on the pothole as a way of warning the other residents that here there is a pothole. Because just imagine you're driving on the road, on a tarred road, and you find grass having just sprouted on the road. You will want to evade that. But also to us, it was a protest to the local authority that your potholes are now growing grass. So we will do this, and then we'll take pictures and take the local authority. And we encourage the residents of Bulawayo, wherever they are, if you find potholes, alert the local authority and alert other residents of it. And then people started doing this action in different parts of the country, of the city, where they will see potholes. Just, it didn't need a shovel really, because it was during the rainy season. We will just uproot a shrub and just throw it onto the pothole and take a picture, and then take the local authority. And in exactly 2 days, the local authority responded and patched all the potholes where these shrubs or the grass was planted on the road. So that is the first incident that I want to share, because it compelled the local authority to realize that the local authority had either to allow and let us continue doing this, and they face embarrassment, or they to act and close the potholes, and then they close the embarrassment and they stop the embarrassment on their side. Then the second one is the issue of water. Bulawayo is having a serious water problem currently, and we are at our non-revenue water, which is water which is mainly lost, especially through spills and deaths, is at 52%. So whatever is being pumped from our treatment plant, 52% of it is lost through water pass. And the local authority is not taking action. When people complain, they say they don't know where these pests are. So what we then did is we then tailor-made a birth certificate, because everyone who is born, everyone who is alive has an identity, and our first identity is the birth certificate. So we then took the birth certificate, we tailor-made it, and then we went to every place which had a water burst, and then we gave it a birth certificate. So what we'll do, we'll talk to the locals in that vicinity to find out when did this start. So the name for every of it was a water burst. Where is it? We'll locate where it is, and then we'll ask when did it start. They will tell us the time. Some knew the month, some just knew the year. We'll just put it there. We will then have an estimation of how much water is lost there. And then we'll then have the issue of the parent. Who is the parent? The parent is Bulawayo City Council. And because they are responsible for the infrastructure and for making sure that these water pits are actually fixed. And then our birth certificate, you have someone called an informant. When a child is getting a birth certificate, the government wants to know who is informing the government that the child is born. So we then filled that part, that our campaign was called Beta Bulawayo. We are the informants that are informing the Bulawayo City Council that a water pest has been born in this place. And we even gave it a code. Our birth certificate have what is called a birth entry number. So a birth entry number is unique to each person. So we're giving a number unique to each of these water pests. And the interesting part of this one was this second one on this picture. It was in front of the Bulawayo City Council Waterworks Department offices. The department responsible for fixing the water pests, it was in front of their gate, but they were not fixing it. So when we did this, we did this over 2 days. We will also do this, take pictures, tag the Bulawayo City Council. When we did this, Bulawayo City Council, as a parent, they responded and fixed all the water pests that had a certificate given to them. And then, because they had a problem that if they don't do this, we will continue looking for more, and we will continue giving them responsibility over these pests, and we will continue mobilizing other people to do similar actions. So they came in, they fixed them. When they fixed it, they then called us. They said, we have fixed these water pests. Now, because you have given them the birth certificate, we have fixed them. Now, can you give them a death certificate? So they were also getting the fun of it. We said, no, we are not going to give a death certificate because you have fixed it. Maybe we will give it a national ID because all Zimbabweans, after the birth certificate, you have a national ID. But we didn't continue. What was the effect of this? Our colleagues in Harare, the capital city, saw this campaign. They loved it. They came, they approached us. We shared the concept. We shared the template. They replicated it in the capital city, and they reported to us that they also realized the success through it. So just in a nutshell, these are some of the dilemma actions that we've been doing to push the local authority to act on their mandate in terms of service delivery.
Amazing, Kumbulani. Thank you so much for that, and those wonderful 2 examples. And this is also like, you know, embodying how to mobilize for democracy and also at the local level. Like, we're not only thinking about only elections and representatives, but it's also that participation around that. Let me now turn towards Pedro Silva, who is the founder of the Liberation Comedy Project. And I think we will hear a slightly different story from Pedro, but also how like the fun and the comedy can bring people together, especially in, you know, like the polarized context of the US. So Pedro, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for having me first and foremost. Thanks for doing this. The Liberation Comedy Project was born out of frustration. There's a tenet in comedy that comedy is basically tragedy plus time. And one of the ways that I also will talk about it is disaster plus distance. And when I looked at a lot of the issues that face our society and looking at the historical arc, I look at some things and I say, okay, how can I collapse time and make this a little bit funnier, a little bit sooner. Because when we laugh at something, typically we only can laugh at things that we've processed. So if we haven't processed it yet, then it's very difficult to laugh at it. And so I tried to incorporate some of the different elements that I have cultivated over time, because I'm also a pastor. And I've been a pastor for about a dozen years. And I started out as a conservative Christian, and I ended up in a liberal context. And I saw both the wide chasms between how they uh, embrace faith, but I've also seen the very similar behaviors that they have at extremes. And so I see it as universally ridiculous. And so the Liberation Comedy Project was an opportunity to say, not just like that's what they do, but this is also what we do. And how can we pay attention to the fact that we do some of the same things, have some of the exact same behaviors, and laugh at the ridiculousness of some of the ways that humans engage in relationships, because a lot of it is survival based. And so we treat and experience things as existential threats when they aren't. And then we ignore existential threats when they're actually right in front of us. And so I try to bring that to bear, both through comedy and through my comedy kind of has a little bit of a sprinkle of spirituality in it, because I can play off the fact that I'm a pastor, and it surprises some people. And I can sometimes say a little thing that they're like, "Oh, I'm shocked to hear a pastor say this." So I kind of play around with those tendencies that we have to be followers. Because even though I'm a pastor that tries to help people find their own inner leader, not try to find somebody else to follow so they don't have to take responsibility for the decisions that they make. Because without going into a long diatribe, I also do not believe in people who say that they are undecided or can't make a distinction or all these things. I see those things as like fear-based as well, and another survival instinct that is tripping us up in a time when we don't need to have those instincts at play. And so, um, like in terms of the people who say they're undecided, I say, the decision to not make a decision is a decision, and that it's an ego-based decision. And the only decision that an ego can make is the decision not to make a decision, because you don't want to take responsibility for an unpopular outcome. And so, since you can't tell which is going to be the most popular and who you should follow, you just decide not to decide and then wait it out, or you go with the crowd and then have a ready-made excuse to then say, "Oh, I don't know, everybody was doing it," or what you saw after the Holocaust, where people say things like, "Oh, I didn't know it was gonna be that bad," or "I was just doing my job." I'm like, okay, let's look at how silly that is. Let's look at how silly that is right now. Because if we wait to find out how silly it is, it's gonna be a lot of tragedy before this becomes comedy. But if we leverage history and experience and our own internal kind of like internal system in the real present moment, we can actually leverage those things, collapse time, make better decisions in the present moment, take full responsibility, learn from our mistakes, and go forward. So that's pretty much, I needed to do that because otherwise I would have been a very angry person, working in the church and then working in the bridging space, which I have been in bridging for about a little over 8 years, in different capacities, starting off as a faith partner and then working in bridging in a different organization. So I've been really exposed to people in bridging movement, and there's a tendency um, for some folks in the bridging movement, and I apologize for y'all in advance. Well, I'm not really apologizing. I'm saying that it's a fake apology. I fake apologize right now and say that sometimes we do false equivalencies, because we just don't want to look like we're being some kind of way. And I think that it's more important to just hold your ground, stand your position. And if your argument and your position is valid and true and based in objectivity, it'll handle the test of time. And then if it doesn't, then you were just wrong. Get over it. People are. Take your F and then keep going forward. Change the F from failure to forward. Learn from it and keep going. So that's pretty much my perspective. I really like what Kumbulani showed, and I've used that even before I started doing comedy. Even before I was a pastor, I didn't know what I was doing because it was an intrinsic thing that I developed, to be able to witness the ridiculous. And I'll give like a couple examples and then I'll shut up. But when I was a kid, if I was in the mall, and sometimes like a white woman will like grab her purse and like, kind of hold it because like, oh no, this black guy's gonna rob me. and I knew I had no intention of robbing them. But what I would do is I would grab my stuff just as tight as they were doing to make them look how ridiculous they were, and then I would point and scream and start running and say, that lady, that old white lady is trying to rob me, and just run in the other direction. And then my friends would be like, what's wrong with you? And I'd be like, that white lady's trying to rob me. That white lady's trying to rob me. And the show, like, hey, look at yourself. You're ridiculous. Like, snap out of this, and I don't think she laughed, but I think, or the many times I've done stuff like that. And the last example I'll give is I was in, I've always been able to communicate with words since I was very young. And I did a short story in a class, and my teacher, I was the only Black kid in the class, and the teacher gave me a C when I deserved an A. The other kids said I deserved an A. Everybody was shocked I didn't get an A. She gave me a C for my short story. I advocated for myself and asked, hey, how come I got a C when everybody else got A's? And I knew that she had to uphold this thing, because sometimes the other white kids would feel bad if I made good grades. So she didn't want them to feel bad, because historically I'm supposed to be less intelligent. So I started getting excited whenever I told myself, when she gives me a C, I'm gonna take it as an A. So whenever I got a C, I would go, yes, a C. And then I'll just keep doing it until eventually she started grading me accurately. So those types of things, I think, are ways of combating these institutions, by showing this is how silly you are. Pay attention. So that's where I am, and that's what motivates me.
Thank you, Pedro, so much for that. And it's insane how we're looking at like normalizing the ridiculous around us. But now let us turn into our scholar in-house, Sophia McLennan, who is the director of the Center of Global Studies and also professor of international affairs and comparative literature at Penn State University. Sophia, you've been studying this like your whole career, both things, like dilemma actions, humor, satire in the US and everywhere. So I'll let you comment and share your wisdom also, like what's behind this.
Yeah, so not exactly my whole career, but the whole career has really looked at how culture deals with forms of repression. So obviously there's a lot for me to look at. The story of how I got involved in looking specifically at dilemma actions comes from Sergio Popovich reaching out to me, who's an activist who a couple of you guys know, who said, hey, you do research on satire and its effects on civic engagement, and I have experience as an activist on this, let's talk. And what I found was that many activists and comedians have direct experience with this makes a difference, right? You've either done it spontaneously, or in some cases it's been intentional and planned, but there's story after story of how this has worked. And I said, well, in the world I work in, that's cool, but we need proof. So we need to get some actual data. We need to study this in a way that we can measure it. So the research project that we initially did, well, we did a small study. That's the book Pranksters versus Autocrats, which was sort of highlighting 44 really well-known cases about dilemma actions and tracking success effects across a range of metrics, including not just were you able to achieve your goal, like we heard from Kumbulani, did you get the potholes filled, but other things like, were you able to change the narrative? Were you able to draw more people into your movement? And from there, we took another stab at the study and looked at an existing data set, which shows that nonviolent movements are twice as successful as violent ones, which, up until then was pretty much the gold standard on tactics, the tactics being nonviolence works. What we wanted to find out was, did those nonviolent movements that use dilemma actions have any different success measure, or was it more or less the same? And what we were able to find was that, yes, the numbers are substantially different When you look at the nonviolent movements that incorporate the kinds of creative tactics that include dilemma actions, which put your opponent in a lose-lose position, then you see a significant difference in success. So if you take out actions that don't use dilemma actions, those tend to have about a 50% success rate. And if they use dilemma actions, they have a 63% success rate, which in the land of, success and activism is a massive difference. And then when we were able to measure across other things like sympathetic media coverage, or again, whether you increase campaign participants, those numbers skew far higher into, 85, 90% often. So you have certain kinds of cases, for example, like people who are protesting in highly repressive contexts, like in Belarus, where full-on regime change is unlikely. But what you are able to do is get the population to be far more aligned with your perspective. So dilemma actions have a bunch of basic elements to them. And the biggest thing, the most obvious one, is that you want to pick an action that makes the irony of repression easy for people to see. So the simple way of thinking about it is that all repression is itself intrinsically ironic, because it says it's doing something good for the people when what it's doing is hurting them. So you say, this is normal. This is the repressive system says this is the way it has to be. And I am taking care of you as I repress you. And people go, oh, they get used to hearing that story. And all you have to do is poke your finger at that thing and say, you know what? They're not really taking care of us. And that's why Kumbulani's example with the potholes is so fantastic, because you're not even allowing us to drive. We cannot physically move forward. So he's just able to show, the system is not taking care of us. That's the easiest way to do it. And so these kinds of tactics, and we have a huge website we've created with over 420 cases where people can look at these. Some of them are funny, not all of them are, but they all use this dilemma of allowing you to show that all power that represses you is ironic. And so you just use that creative, clever side to show it, and then it makes it much easier to get strength for your movement.
Excellent, Sophia. Thank you. And how does comedy also comes in for bringing attention to our specific topics and also in polarized societies?
So the comedy piece here is, again, you're talking to a nerd, right? So the kinds of things that Pedro's describing are funny, right? But they're not the same funny as Kumbulani's. So there's a cathartic thing that happens when people are able to laugh at the system. That's not a bad thing, but it doesn't necessarily move towards political change. So what you're looking for is, in fact, satire versus, say, mockery. You're looking at the kind of humor that engages people to think in the most sophisticated ways. And so not some humor is just like, hey, those guys are a bunch of idiots, ha ha ha. Right? So that has some benefits, can have some benefits, but humor isn't one big bucket. And so what you're looking for is the kind of humor that's targeting, right, conceptual issues, right? These conceptual issues. So of course you can have lots of humor that helps expose racism and sort of just basic elements of prejudice. But that humor doesn't necessarily always have that satirical edge that helps people then sort of recognize what they maybe could do about it or how they can maybe think it through. So one of the things that happens in humor studies is we really divide out what does the humor's target, how does it affect you cognitively, and what are the goals then later in terms of what does it do in terms of building community, all of this humor, for what it's worth, right? This is important for people to hear. All of this is what we call boundary heightening humor. This is not humor that makes everyone hold hands. This is humor that makes one side that gets the joke and that is on the good side, and the other side that is the butt of the joke because they're part of the problem. The only kind of humor that's going to put everyone together in the same bucket is like humor that's like, you know, human beings are disgusting or something like that. So there is an element of increasing division socially in this kind of humor. But most of the analysis is that that's what you need for change. I mean, you have to make distinctions between the people who are part of the problem and the people who are trying to solve it.
Thank you, Sophia. What we call good polarization in that regard. So thank you. Let me now turn to Ivan. Ivan Marovic is the executive director of the International Center for Nonviolent Conflict and also a former activist. Not former, you're still an activist. You were formerly part of Otpor in Serbia. There you go. Ivan, apart from being a very funny person that I know personally, you also have a lot of lessons from this wide range of tactics and also approaches towards the use of comedy for democracy. So do you want to share some examples and also like the insights in lessons that you have gathered throughout the years?
Yes, indeed. And you know, what is good about movement humor is you don't have to be funny. Actually, a lot of my colleagues from Otpor were not very funny people. But the idea is that, you know, the designing humorous experiences for the wider population, for movement participants, tends to pay off. And I would just tie some of the examples that were shared with some of the insights that Sophia mentioned and kind of try to connect it to some of the practical lessons that people can take away from this. So for instance, you know, when you look at the Kumbalani's example, especially the birth certificates or the birth certificates, you know, that is something that kind of reminds me of some of my earlier kind of experiences way before Otpor, which was the movement that kind of made the use of strategic humor, and I'll talk more about it. But way before then, as a student organizer, I had the first taste of that when we were doing our campaign to force the dean of the university to resign. And in that very humorous action, when we were like doing the quest for the dean and we're looking for him everywhere and he was nowhere to be found, the climax was when we went to a fortune teller. And with the fortune teller, we tried to get like, when is the dean going to resign? The fortune teller was throwing beans and opening cards, and it was like a big, how shall I say, media spectacle as a result of that. And to what Sophia was saying, if you're not laughing, that means you're a butt of the joke. So the humorous experience was such that the dean of the university was actually became a laughing stock. And that leads me to the first important aspect of strategic humor, and that is that it exposes certain power relations to be false or to be advertised improperly. So you have somebody who is in position of power, not just that they take care of people, because sometimes they claim they do, but they claim, and their bigger claim is that they have some sort of power over others. They can make things happen. And by turning them into a butt of the joke, you actually expose that as fake, and their power actually kind of disappears. That actually also requires the distance that Pedro was talking about, because nobody's gonna laugh about a dire situation. But by turning it into some kind of, putting it in some other realm, making it more absurd, making it part of some world that is not our world, for instance, that case that we kind of were asking for fortune teller to help us in our political struggle, or turning birth certificates and that whole familiar relationships and IDs for, you know, for these birth pipes and stuff like that. You kind of transforming the current political problem into something that is happening on some other realm. You're creating that distance and ability for the people to laugh. But again, how shall I say? The point is that not everybody is going to laugh. And if you're not laughing, you're the butt of the joke. So another thing that is also important, and that leads me to my kind of second example, which is kind of the much more like a dilemma action, is that you have to offer, because you're creating an experience where everybody is participating in that joke, even your opponents. But you want to offer them the way out, because you don't want to create a joke where they're stuck. And this is why, like, I don't know, when you think about jokes that are dependent on ethnic stereotypes, those jokes never land well. Why? Because you can't get out of them. But the jokes, if you look at Molière, for instance, that are about people's behaviors and habits, especially, how shall I say, some things that we are not proud of, those jokes actually can have a cathartic role. So let me give you an example. It's our famous barrel of laughs. So we decided to collect money for Milosevic's retirement. Milosevic was the president of Serbia at the time, and he didn't want to step down. So we put a big barrel in the street, and we say, there is a sign, we're collecting money for Milosevic's retirement, insert a coin, please. And if you don't have money because of Milosevic's economic policy, then bang the barrel. And there was a baseball bat next to the barrel. And so people would show up, and they would bang the barrel, and more people would show up. And then the police finally appears, and the police is like, there is a commotion, there is like, whose barrel is this? Nobody knows whose barrel is that. And then decide to take the barrel away, while we snap some photos and we send it to the media and we say, police arrested the barrel. So now the police is the butt of the joke. But in what way? We are not making fun of them, as a lot of these jokes about police officers go, that they're not very intelligent and all that stuff, and they can get offended. But in this strategic use of humor, what is going through their mind is like, people are laughing at us. Why? Because we were ordered to do this, to arrest the barrel, and this is not our job. So in a sense, their anger and disappointment is directed towards their superiors. So strategic use of humor is not just making fun of somebody, but making fun of somebody in a way that they change their behavior because they want to step out of that position where they're at the butt of the joke. So my point is, and I think this is where I can summarize, is that when we think about humor strategically, if we think about it as exposing and changing the power relations and the power dynamics, and if we think about designing these humorous experiences and dilemma actions in a way that they lead to behavioral change on the side of the target of our joke, we can actually have big impact in making those changes and making the power shifts that we want to see.
Thanks so much, Ivan. And I think let me invite our last panelist to introduce our last panelist, David Perdue, who is an activist and comedian from Atlanta. Check out his podcast, What's Good in Atlanta, and I think like other kinds of projects too. But David, you have seen how like these humor dynamics happening around you and in Atlanta, and how like these power dynamics, as Ivan was saying, like are challenged in stand-up comedy, but also like in other kinds of conversations. So I'll let you also share your lessons and also like insights.
Yeah. First, I just want to say thank y'all for having me a part of this. I'm very happy I went last. This isn't a tough act to follow at all. So many very just brilliant minds. I was literally over here taking notes like I was not on the panel. So I just want to say I thank y'all for the insight y'all giving me. If I'm being honest, a friend of mine who I co-founded this organization called Comedy and Conversations, looks to use comedy as a tool to have deeper conversations about different topics. He is described as an activist in a lot of our copy, and so am I. And I always kind of give pause to that, because to be an activist I feel is somewhat of a sacred thing, and I feel very strongly that I am a comedian, who uses that platform, who sees the ability that the platform has. But I will say, in the lessons that comedy has taught me, and one of the things I've learned is that I am able to say things and kind of get to certain people in a different way with humor. And I think that that can't be understated. Like, I tell people all the time that when I get an audience of people, I never know their political background. Rarely do I see their faces. Do I know their race? I don't know anything about them. But when they laugh at a joke, it is a moment of unity and it feels like magic. And I don't take that for granted. I think for me, I kind of got into, I guess we call the activist space. Is if you're not even familiar, I'm gonna hip you to some Georgia politics. So a few years ago, we had a U.S. senator, whose name, he was a Trump supporter. His name was David Perdue, which is, if you're looking now, is my name. And so, what ended up happening, because I had the same name, I would get so many people direct messaging me on different platforms asking me to do various things, mainly like fill potholes in their streets, or fix stoplights, or really things that I realized that I hope that they knew that, like, U.S. senators don't do that. That's not their job to do that. And so part of my journey through this was recognizing that we have an uninformed populace, which is makes things, ripe for misinformation, for all of these things, and people just don't know what people do. And so one of the reasons why I started Comedy Conversations with my co-founder was to just help people understand on a local level what their politicians do, so that hopefully they can not message a comedian who has the same name as a U.S. senator about something that person could never do. I felt like that was just an important thing to start. It's just having people using humor to get people in the door to have conversations about things that are affecting them personally, and see ways that I can see change. I think on a social level, a grander level, as far as my own personal comedy is concerned, one of the things that I would say I'm most fascinated with is the process of othering people. I think the process of othering people is the root of a lot of the problems that we go through. And so even in my human, and I appreciate kind of everybody's take on especially Yvonne, like your take, and then, like, what do we do after? And that's one of the things I wrote down. What do we do after the joke? Right? What does it mean for someone to hear a joke about themselves and then have no place to land afterwards? And I think there's plenty of information about what can make a joke funny to that person of power. But the question is, and it's a more nuanced kind of, and it's not, I don't think it's ideal for everybody, but I think it is important to ask, for some people, to ask the question, where do we go after the joke? And how can you fit that into the joke? I think that is super important. I also think, as someone who, if you're familiar with, one of my heroes is Martin Luther King Jr. I ended up going to Morehouse just like Martin Luther King Jr. And one of the things that I personally love about comedy, it stems from Martin Luther King quote, which is, the true peace is not merely the absence of tension, but the presence of justice. Right. And so I feel like, just as I'll say, as a Black American, like, there's a lot of tension that my experience can provide. And a lot of times people think that is not something that belongs in a comedy club. And for me, I go, well, then you're not searching for the peace that I'm searching for, and I truly feel like, and on the other end of that, if I say that I love you, right, then to challenge you is not me not loving you. It's actually helping that you thought that I can raise your level of awareness so that we can love each other better, right, as human beings. So one of the things that you talk about strategy and advice and tactics that I've always been fascinated with was Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement. His use of his understanding of theater as the Civil Rights Movement is theater, and his use of one specifically, his use of children. It was very tactical. He would use children, especially around the time when televisions were becoming part of people's homes, and when people had to see children being water hosed on them or dogs sicked on them, it forces you to ask yourself, who am I right now? You know, that process of othering that they were used to doing, that you can say, oh, those are those people. But when you see it, and if you're able to see yourself in that other, it causes you to think a little bit differently about how you treat them. And so for me, comedy provides a way to kind of hold that mirror in the same way, not in this, obviously not the same the magnitude of Martin King, but like it's caused it. My hope is to pose a mirror to things, to people, to say, what am I being right now? Who do I want to be? Am I who this comedian says I am? If I am, what does it look like for me to move past that? And so I hope I answered the question, but these are kind of the things that kind of like stir me when it comes to comedy and its use in democracy or just social change in general,
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
I want to turn back to Sophia because you shared two specific, very cool insights just now on the chat, driving our attendees to also like check the chat for links, etc. But also on the element of issue priming too, and the types of humors that we're listening to the conversation. So I'll let you just add a little bit more of meat into what you just shared, Sophia.
So as anyone activist knows, you have an audience that already is basically on your side. They get what you're saying. They get what the source of the problem is. Most of the time, that's not really necessarily your ideal audience, although, of course, you want to keep those people on your side and you want to keep them from getting burnt out, etc. So comedy can play a good role in that. But when we're talking about the audience that doesn't get it, they're not really following this, comedy does this thing we call issue priming, which is that and this is particularly true in the land of stand-up, but even as Ivan talks about, if people are walking in the street and they just don't want to be political, they don't care. If you do something funny, they're going to pay attention because people like humor. So they're paying attention when they would otherwise be disconnected. So issue priming simply takes those people who have a barrier that says, I don't want to think about this. It reduces that barrier and it makes it possible for them to think about the topic that's important to you. So we know that. We also know that comedy, depending on how sophisticated it is, this is where the comedy, if it's more satirical, will work in this way, reduces what we call counter-arguing, right? So if I said to Pedro, I was like, this issue, this is this way, and he's like, I disagree with you, right? His first reaction is, I disagree. So if I introduce the topic through comedy, though, his reaction to disagree will go down because his brain is literally busy processing the joke. So he wants to get the joke. Everyone always wants to get the joke. If they don't get it, then they feel stupid. And that's not a reaction people want. So they want to get the joke. And if they're busy getting the joke, that may allow the point you're trying to make to kind of come in through the back door. Now, this is something that you want to think about because we like to think about this. Oh, this is great. It's going to help us with our social justice. But meanwhile, it actually can also work in the other way, right? Fascists can use this kind of humor too. So it can get people to suddenly go, oh, yeah, ha, ha, ha. Oh, wait, oh, The counter arguing that effect may not last over time, but for a minute, you maybe agreed with someone who was making a joke that you would actually find pretty offensive. So that's one of those factors that can play on more than one side. And then the other thing to point out, and I'm sure that our stand-up people have seen this, is that if your audience feels like they're being attacked, they're gonna hate you. Okay, when people feel like they're being mocked through humor, their reaction is even worse. Again, I could say, hey, Kumbulani, you're sexist. And he's like, no, I'm not sexist, whatever. But if I make a joke and make him feel like I'm accusing him of being sexist through humor, he's going to be even angrier. That we know too, right? So there is a blowback function here where you want to really think tactically about the relationship between the joke and the audience.
Thank you, Sophia. Pedro, be our guest.
So I want to point out, oh, I have an echo. Okay. I want to point out that for the style of comedy that I'm doing, I call it liberation comedy for a reason. And it's to liberate every person that is participating in it. So even the person that may imagine, and I use imagine intentionally, that I'm against them, I'm not against them. I'm for the liberation of all people, including the people who are being bound by the ideas that they hold. And so an example I can give you is yesterday I went to a haunted house with my kids, and I laughed through almost the whole haunted house experience because even though these zombie people are all up on me, I knew that I was safe, and at the same time, they looked like they were terrifying. And so I was able to be like laugh and be scared at the same time. And people go to comedy, to movies and things like that, and there's something that happens inside of us. It makes us feel this tension, and then we get this release. And the same thing happens like if you go into your garage and you think you see a snake and you freak out and then you realize it's a hose. The first thing you do is you laugh at yourself and you go, ha ha ha, man, I'm silly. And you get this release and you let go and you realize like, oh, next time I'm not going to be so scared. So some of the mechanisms that I use when I'm doing comedy is to help people see that I don't have anybody that I'm against in my comedy. People might, it's just to laugh at the ridiculousness of some of the things that we terrify. And like the last set I did, I set it up and I said, I talked about having three major fears in my life. The first one's public speaking. So I said, okay, and it relates to people and it shocks them like, oh, you're up here talking in front of us, but you're terrified of public speaking. Okay, that's very human. I can relate to you. Then the second one, it was a lot of people that so happened to be Jewish in the space. And the second piece of my joke was Adolf Hitler, which I knew I was going to say Adolf Hitler. And so I said, the other one is Adolf Hitler. And then I said it, and everybody kind of was like, ooh, and there was no laughter. And everybody's kind of like tense, like, okay, what the heck is this guy about to say? Because this is a tense thing. And then the third one I said, and the third one with a little bit more emphasis is Madonna. And so when I said Madonna, it's like no one expected me to say Madonna because it's like there were these other things. And then the tension released and they could able to laugh with me and also at the tension that they were holding, and that's what the invitation is. And then to be reflective after that of like, how does this fear that I'm holding in front of me keep me from seeing what's in front of me? And maybe if I slow down, breathe with it, and more reflective, I can laugh more at myself. And then the other people don't seem as a threat the way I experience them. So that's the style I use. But some people could take it as mockery, but it's not.
Thank you, Pedro. I saw Ivan's hand, so I'll go first to him and then I'll pivot to you, David.
Yeah, I just wanna piggyback on what Pedro was saying and something Sophia said earlier, so and I think these two things are important to avoid the humor that actually is kind of counterproductive and creates like a negative backlash. The first thing what Pedro was saying is self-depreciating humor. And that's kind of the example that I used about like us going to a fortune teller to learn about like our dean is going to resign or not. First you have to accept that you are going to make a fun of yourself, and to kind of be in a position to use self-depreciating humor and then use it as a cathartic, how should I say, vehicle for others. But for that you need to be. That is going to reduce mockery. Because when you're doing self-depreciating humor, you are kind of putting yourself in that position, but also you are kind of projecting yourself as a mirror for others. So they can say, because this is the point of civil resistance and the point of movements in politics. Everybody knows that we have political problems, and we know that like people in power, they're the source of all these problems. But where movements actually create a very quantum leap is that they ask the population, how did you contribute to the problem? How did you, through your action or lack of action, actually are part of the problem too? And what can you do? How can you change your behavior so that we can fix that problem? So in the words of Mohandas Gandhi, the British are ruling India for their own benefit. Why should we help them? So his question is to the Indians, not to the British at all. And so humor helps there, because then they can kind of, how should I say, think about it like, how did I contribute? What can I do to change? For that, mockery and that kind of harsh humor is dangerous. but teasing is actually good. And this is what makes a good joke. It's a friendly humor. You tease them, you poke them a little bit. Hey, is it something that you did that contributed there? And that can actually then feel cathartic, because again, going back to what I said earlier, if it leads to the change of behavior, then they can step out of this role and they can actually participate in the joke in the best possible way. And they can finally have a laugh as well. So I think this is kind of going back to the strategic point of humor, is that we have that very powerful tool, which is humor. We should be able to understand all its levels and all its different implications, and understand that, like, sometimes we need to serve the role of a jester and the role of somebody who is going to kind of initiate things, and then maybe, how should I say, through self-depreciating humor, we become, how should I say, part of the joke and take a less dignified role. But we are not, as movements, we are not at the center of what we are doing. Actually, we have a much bigger role to play, and that is maybe, how should I say, where humor can fit in.
Thank you, Van. David, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of, Yvonne kind of said it, but I want to piggyback on that as far as like organization. So one of the things I learned as a stand-up when I was talking anytime I would talk about a race, is early on when I would use the word racist, I could feel people pull up and kind of be a little more hesitant to receive what I was saying. And that was an early lesson in the power of words, right? And I had to ask myself, what is the end goal? Do I have to say the word in order to get the point across? Or is there a way I can say the word to get them to get the point without them initially kind of pulling back, right? So like, how deep was I able to kind of insert my insights on it without using the word, right? Not to say you shouldn't always name a thing, but at the same time I had to ask myself what the goals were, also, I think it's very important, we're talking about democracy and we're talking about the way people receive things, is you have to be able to critique what you believe in. Like, I think a lot of times we get in these spaces and it feels like what comedians will call it clapter, where we're essentially speaking to our own choirs of people that already agree with us, that already believe us, and then they just clap to what we say. And so one of the things that I think is really necessary to kind of advance any kind of discussion or conversation is acknowledge people's very real concerns, even if they are based in something that you see is like, maybe this isn't correct, but like being able to address it and say, no, here is where my position might have egg on its face. Here's where my position is not necessary, it's not bulletproof. Because I think that's what makes people go to their corners and hold tightly, is they think that we are 100% right. You have to be 100% right. And there's no room for growth when people stand in that position and they're unwilling to move. And so, if I go on stage and I have a joke about Donald Trump, in the same time as I'm writing, I can't think that, Kamala Harris any of her businesses are bulletproof. Like, it's just dishonest, right? And I think now more than ever, people look to comedians for some reason. I don't know when this happened, but they look to us as these like moral authorities, or these like people who wouldn't lie to them. And we're seeing more and more as comedy becomes greater and interwoven in capitalism, you're gonna get people who are bought off. You know what I mean? And so the more you're able to kind of distance yourself from being bought off and really stand in the position of, I just want to be truthful. I want to be honest. There's one of my favorite comedians, Patrice O'Neal. I think he said it best. He says, "You can't F with the truth. You cannot F with the truth." And so when people hear the actual truth, regardless of where they're at, and they know that you might believe in this, but you're willing to challenge something that you believe in, it gives you more credibility. And I feel like a lot of times comedy, especially now, is losing its credibility because it is being bought off by greater entities. Because, at the end of the day, it is a business for a lot of people. But if you recognize the platform and the power that it has, for me, there's a responsibility to say, all right, though I might believe this, I can't be afraid to critique it, because I don't think that's good comedy. You know, I think you have to be able to critique the things you believe in.
Thank you, David. Before turning to you, Sophia, just want to turn to Kombulani, who wanted to chime in too.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you very much to all the colleagues and the contributions. I just wanted to add just one little thing, that I think one thing that I've seen is that using strategic humor and dilemma actions, especially if you are not a comedian yourself, is you have to behave like a predator. Because we work with authoritarian states that are always predatory to us as activists, and you have to be a predator to them also, and you have to be perched, you know, on the trees of society, and look around. When are they going to make a silly mistake? When are they going to make a silly pronouncement? When are they going to, when is the next best opportunity? Because it's not about just looking at, just thinking of something and doing it. We always have to look at that opportune time to say, this is the best time for us to strike. And when you do that, you realize that sometimes the impact becomes more and even better. I remember when the Bulawayo city councillors had complained that the government was not giving them their bonuses, and we're campaigning for clinics to open 24/7. And they'd refused. So it was towards Christmas, and we looked at that as an opportunity, and we bought them Christmas cards. And we went to distribute the Christmas cards to them in their last meeting, and the Christmas card inside had a message: thank you for not allowing us, the clinics, to open 24/7. So initially, when they see a Christmas card, they will want to take the Christmas card because everyone wants a gift. But the message inside, they don't want it, but they can't refuse the Christmas card, but they can't accept the message. So it was just about, it's about creating an opportunity. In 2023, the mayor was appealing for funding for the mayor's Christmas cheer fund, and he was refusing West reclaimers the opportunity to operate legally in the city. And the West reclaimers had to donate to the mayor's Christmas cheer fund. What did they donate? The trash that they are picking in the street, and they packed it into boxes and went to donate it. So, you know, it was a moment to shock the mayor, but he had to accept the gift because he didn't know what it is. When he opens, he finds the message inside, because it's just about an opportunity. You never know when the opportunity comes, but I know the opportunity always comes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kumbulani. Sophia, bring it home before we turn into the audience.
Yeah, so I just wanted to give the audience a chance to see that what we're having explained with David and Pedro's experiences and what we're hearing from Kumbulani and Ivan are really two spheres of ways in which comedy can have a tactical effect on change. In the case of David and Pedro, you're hearing about the ways in which comedy can build new alliances and create communities and offer catharsis. And in fact, again, you know, do this issue priming, open people to thinking about things in different ways. Whereas what Kumbulani and Ivan are talking about is using a tactical use of humor to actually poke at the source of power in a very particular way. So the target in those cases is essential, because at the end of the day, that's your dominant audience, is the policy, the politician, the repressive regime. And so you're pulling people on your side, but you've got a very particular way of showing that your target is oppressive, right? It is not serving the people. So that these are types of comedy that really kind of form in very different structures. And so while they have similar effects in some ways, they are really structured in terms of their goals and audience. And again, you know, the way in which the humor works quite differently.
Thank you, Sophia. And indeed, given the wide range of practitioners that right now are involved in democracy building, and we see, you know, like this bridging and also like, you know, the strategic nonviolent activists, how do we make these perspectives talk to each other is key. So thank you so much, Sophia. Now I would like to turn to two questions that have been shared by our audience. Please keep the questions coming on. The first one, which our dear Ivan went ahead and added one initial answer, but I will still read it for also like other members of the panel to give their insights. This question is by Nicole Dolman, and the question is, how can movements leverage humor in digital spaces, and especially on the case of memes? Because memes have been used to normalize, you know, things like political violence. So, and they have been very effective, and they are also an instrument with humor, but also like loaded with meaning. So how can memes, or, you know, like how can movements push back in the digital space with humor? And what do memes have to do with that? Ivan, you gave already an answer there, but I wanted to also give up an opportunity to anyone in the panel. Sophia, I'll give you a first crack at it.
So the quick answer is buckle up, because it's only getting worse. Okay, so this is whatever you're seeing, it's changing by the day. So the best answer to this is, in fact, to arm at as young an age as we can. Ideally, you'd be doing this sort of in 4th grade. You teach young people how to understand how memes work, and you do it by having them create memes, by having them debate memes. But this world of manipulated information isn't going away. So the only way to fix it is to take seriously media literacy and to teach people to have a very sophisticated ability to handle it. And communities that do this, Finland is at the top, you find that over time, people just don't fall for stuff because they're used to it. In my classes right now at Penn State, I always have my students create memes that are both intending to misinform the public and memes that are intending to make fun of memes that misinform the public. So that's the other thing that we know, that one of the most powerful ways to do it is, in fact, to make fun of people who fall for stupid, misinforming memes. There was a head of information in Taiwan who created a hashtag that was humor over rumor, right? So it's creating a culture where we are sort of monitoring this stuff and making fun of people who share it and making fun of the jokes themselves. Those are really the two most powerful ways to fix it.
Excellent. Thank you, Sophia. Pedro.
So another thing I think to be mindful of when we're talking about memes is Rene Girard's mimetic theory. And a lot of folks who are manipulative understand mimetic theory. So they know that people usually imitate other people's desires. And so whatever they think that other people want, they think they should want. And a lot of times they're not actually in contact with their own like in value system. So they don't really, a lot of people don't know what they want. That's why memes can have the effect on them. They're like, what does everybody else want? Because I want what they want. And manipulative people, con men, and other folks use that against people. And so if you're mindful of it and you're trying to be a decent human being, then you can use that very same awareness in your comedy. Because like I do that in my comedy. It's because I'm aware of mimetic theory. I'll say, okay, no one wants to be the butt of the joke. They want to get the joke, as Sophia said earlier. And so I try to set up the joke in a way that is accessible to them, even if it's convicting on the inside, because that same mimetic thing is like, okay, if other people are laughing at this, I want to also laugh at this. I also want to get this because I don't want to get left out. I want to, and these things are always at play. And a lot of us are not mindful of it. So I think it's important for any person who has a platform, who understands it, whether they understand it intrinsically and can't articulate it in terms of words because they don't know, but they've witnessed the behavior. Because I witnessed the behavior before I knew there was a word behind the behavior. So I just think that's important to be mindful of. And each person, I think it's important to ask yourself, what do I really want? Because a lot of people don't know. They just don't spend enough time with themselves to understand what they really want, except for to be safe, to be loved, and to belong. And people can manipulate that all day long, and they pretty much do.
Thank you, Pedro. Kumbulani.
Thank you very much. I think I'll give an example of a recent video that went viral following the 10 September American presidential debate, where one of the presidential candidates, Donald Trump, inferred that the Haitian immigrants in Springfield were eating people's pets. And then a South African singer, David Scott, made a video on that, and saying one of the lines in the video is, "People of Springfield, don't eat my pet, don't eat my cat." And that video has gone viral on social media. It's humorous. It makes you laugh when you listen to it, but it sends a message. It talks fun. You know, it's very, very strategic. So to me, I think online, the issue is look for the best moment. It's about looking for the best moment, and also for the best online content. Some people will resonate with music. If music will bring the humor the best, it should be. Some people will do it maybe with just a video, without, maybe this is just without any audio, and they will bring out you know, the best out of a joke out of that, and it will go viral. Because when you are doing a humor online, the issue is that it should be viral. If it loses being viral, then it loses also being a joke and being attractive to the people.
Thank you, Kumbulani. Still, like, we're in the age of internet. So like our another question by Savannah is on the lemma actions specifically. Will we see a new type of dilemma actions meant to de-radicalize? Interesting, given how dilemma actions have been used. Or dilemma actions aim at those who do not have political power in the autocratic sense, but will wish for it. Let me see. Maybe I can turn to you, Ivan.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I think, how to say, the issue of radicalization and de-radicalization is very important. And, you know, one of the tools I always suggest people use is the spectrum of allies, and kind of see where people are. And you want people who are your allies to be more enthusiastic and support your struggle, but you want people who are your opponents to be less enthusiastic. So you want to de-radicalize them. And any kind of action that mobilizes your supporters but also mobilizes your opponents is not the best action, because you don't want to be the engine of your opponent's mobilization. I mean, it's one of the things, you know, kind of, if you think about Trump, he's really good at mobilizing his base, but he also mobilizes his opposition, you know, and gets everybody upset. You don't want to be that. So when you think about dilemma actions, you want to create a dilemma action where you put your, and I would say, you know, the target is not the power holders. When you are a movement, you are not, the power holders, or, you know, whoever is in charge, they are somewhere out there, and they may be like symbolically part of the joke. But the real target is those who are the enablers. And you want them to be in a dilemma, so that the only way out for them is to actually reduce enthusiasm and participation in the actions of the how should I say, side that they belong to. So in a sense, you are creating dilemma to de-radicalize them, so for they to think like this is pointless, or this is how shall I say, makes no sense anymore, or this is all a lie. Especially the last one, because people don't like to be mocked, and this is what Sophia said earlier. And we should when we create humorous experiences and we're designing these things, we should make sure that we don't mock our targets. But another thing that people don't want to be, and even they hate this even more than being mocked, they don't want to be manipulated, they don't want to be exploited. And so if we create dilemma actions that are going to expose the exploitative nature of our opponent and how they are actually exploiting their own minions, their own enablers, that is going to create a situation the same way where, like, people were talking about how smoking is not healthy. Didn't work. People were not convinced by those things. But when they were able to show how cigarette companies were actually manipulating and exploiting people, this was like what led to people like quitting smoking, because nobody wants to be manipulated and exposed. So that's what I think dilemma actions have to have as a result.
Thank you, Van. I'll go to Sophia and then to Pedro.
So at a basic level, true dilemma action isn't going to happen in the kinds of spaces like what Ivan is describing. It isn't going to be a true dilemma action because your target is effectively the allies, the people who are, sort of sympathetic to the radical position. It's not something that's designed for a true dilemma action. That doesn't mean that you can't use comedy effectively to destabilize that position. And one of the best places to look, if you want examples of this exact kind of humor and how powerful it can be, is in the humor that's used within the Muslim world to go after Islamic extremism, right, and radical Islam, so that you can see jokes that are used within that community to try to help, sort of create the context that gets people to not be aligned with some of those far extreme Islamic positions. So whether it's cartoons, whether it's satirical shows, there's a very famous show in Iraq called State of Myths that, for example, imagined that one of the heads of ISIS had been hatched from an egg to make a joke at this idea that this is an Islam that wants to hearken back to the origin. So there's a lot of good examples that we already see of this kind of humor that's used to try to get people out of some of these extreme radical positions. And the person that asked can write to me and I will give them sources to look at. But these are things that we're seeing that are being fairly effective. There's also some pretty good humor inside China, to also give you another example of humor that's being used, to try to get people to think differently about an extremely autocratic society.
Thank you, Sophia. Pedro.
I wanted to introduce the concept of disorienting dilemmas. When you're in ministry, that's some things that we do to help people get out of apathy, is to create a disorienting dilemma so that they are nudged in the direction that you're trying to go, lead them into. So a disorienting dilemma would be, instead of like shoving someone, it's like just pushing them a little bit just so they get a little unstable. And then when their natural systems try to reorient them, they're reoriented in a more kind of like conscious and progressive way. And it's not because you're trying to manipulate them. It's like if a person, like, we can objectively say that slavery is bad, and trying to get somebody out of slavery, even if you're pushing them out, is not a bad thing, even if that person doesn't understand what it takes to escape. And so sometimes you create these disorienting dilemmas that help nudge a person forward until they get to a place of more relative safety, so that they can really evaluate the situation. So I bring up a lot that people are in survival brain. So when you're survival brain, the cognitive capacity to be able to like really evaluate your situation is not in play. You're only trying to think of, how do I get out of this situation? And many people are operating at 90% of the time. 90% may be made up, but it's a lot. A lot of people are all day long only thinking, how do I get out of this anxiety? How do I get out of this situation? And whatever shortcut they think they can take, they're going to take it and then they're going to justify it because they just are trying to survive. And you cannot combat that operating from the same mindset. You have to get to a place. That's why a lot of times I refer to people going inside of themselves, getting still within themselves, evaluating the situation, being conscious that those systems operate in them as well, and then intentionally deciding I'm not going to participate in this way, and then using tools like comedy or some kind of other methodology to nudge people forward. So dilemma actions have to be naturally disorienting in order to get people to move forward. And the last example I'll give is I said to some people, I posted on Facebook, hey, for some people who are undecided, blah, 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 I don't really believe in that. And here's the deal. If this thing goes sideways, please do not bring me a thimble of water or even half of a cracker to my prison cell. So I'm like, people who say they're my friends who want to stay outside of it, I'm like, please don't bring me anything at all to my prison cell. So that they can get disoriented and go like, oh, Pedro's saying it like this. Because I know, because of the people who know me, it'll make them feel a little bit more disturbed, but I want them to pay attention. So I'm like, don't bring me anything. And then for some other people who I feel they should be related to me, I already forgive you for being colonized in your mind. So I don't say to them like, hey, you listen, I already forgive you because I know that your colonized brain can't work. That's putting them down on one side, but I'm also making them think, to that particular audience. Like I can't say that to everyone, but I can say that to some people, and it'll disturb them and disorient them. And that's the way you move sometimes.
Thank you, Pedro. We have just some minutes left. I did want to bring to the attention also Savannah's follow-up question, also about intergenerational gaps. And I think like Savannah, you're pointing to the elements of misinformation and also like the power of meme within the digital world where we see like that intergenerational gap between like different generations. I know probably Ivan, you're also chiming in there. But I also wanted to give the panelists, like the space to also think about that intergenerational question, because also that applies also to humor in general and how that is going to impact the way that people are approaching the issues, and either in a good way or in a problematic way. So Sophia, I see your hand up.
Well, I'm not going to talk for long, but I just want to jump in and say a couple of things. One is that it's more context than generation, right? So that's useful. Although, of course, generations have different perspectives, but here we are on a global panel, and it's important to know that, say, the Serbians have a very high sense of humor, and I can tease Ivan, but if I try to do that in another country, that won't go well, right? So comedy needs context. Context is particularly important. And it isn't just that we want to look at it, again, from different generational standpoints, but we want to think about particular communities. So understanding the context is critical.
Well said. Well said. Well, we are approaching the end of our webinar. It has been an amazing time. I want to thank all of our panelists. It has been absolutely a pleasure and a privilege for me to be able to moderate this conversation. I felt very, very intimidated by all of you. So thank you so much. There will be a follow-up email to all attendees, and we will be sharing the link to the Democracy Resource Hub page, where the insights and additional resources, and also, the links to the projects, the podcast. I forgot to mention Pedro's podcast too, the Liberation Comedy podcast, and also things that Ivan and also Kumbulani and Sophia continue to write, as well as David. Just before everyone leaves, though, I would like to ask everyone, all the attendees, just to take a couple of minutes to write in a final poll. Given that this is what we're calling an intermestic webinar or learning exchange, we would like to know, any insights, any lessons, anything that might think that draws your attention. So please feel free to write your final thoughts there. Did you learn anything? If so, what? Or anything that comes to your mind. As we give everyone the time for that, I just want to thank you all. And yeah, stay tuned for the next webinars because we will continue. And all the best to all of you. I know David, Pedro, Ivan, Sofia, and Kumbulani. You will continue sharing some news with us, and please share the resources that you would like to share. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here, everybody. And thank you all of you panelists. It's been fun. And if you all want to go on my podcast or have me on one of yours, I'm down for it. Be able to continue the conversation.
Yes, we will be sharing on the podcast too. So this conversation will continue, definitely. I will give 1 more minute before ending the poll. And thank you for everyone that is taking the time to write in the poll. Much appreciated. Thank you, guys. You're amazing.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And also thank you everybody who I met or just saw who communicating. I learned a lot. I was really over here taking notes. So just thank you all for all your insight and having me on this panel. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome.
I think I listened to your podcast before, David, and I might have messaged you one time.
Oh, for real?
Yeah.
Wait, which podcast? I do too many.
When I first started my podcast, somebody sent me your podcast, and I was trying to get guests on my podcast.